Alright, and we're back with more conlanging. Now, I'm recording this a couple of days after I posted my 50,000 subscriber update video, and my god, I have been absolutely inundated with new patrons. This is more than I ever would have thought possible. Thank you so much to everyone who has pledged so far, and in fact, I'm getting new patrons with every passing day, so by the time this video actually goes up, this list will probably be out of date. So if you are a $5 plus patron and you don't see your name here, I apologize for that, and know that you will be included in all of the credits for all of the videos going forward. Another absolutely gigantic thank you to each and every one of you. But for now, let's get back to the conlanging. So, I don't really know why. I guess it's just because it's been a very busy month for me, but it feels like it's been ages since I've done one of these. Where was I when I actually left off? Oh yeah, I was toying with the passive-active alternation system thing. So essentially, I need a way to have the applicatives be able to contrast with both the active and the passive voices. But I also need to figure out how the reflexive and the reciprocal fits into that. Yes, and I had this weird idea where the passive stem would actually be the mediopassive stem, which would take an affix to turn it into a true reflexive, and that same affix, if applied to the active stem, would be interpreted as a reciprocal. And then there would be another affix which, when applied to the active stem, it would become an antipassive / D-transitive / D-objective, whatever it's actually called. But that same affix on the mediopassive stem would produce a true passive interpretation. So does that system make sense? Well, first of all, the D-transitive. A D-transitive is really easy to evolve. All you have to do is have some indefinite pronoun, like some word that means one or someone or something, something along those lines, get incorporated into the verb. So let's say we had a transitive sentence like, I see them. So in that case, see is a transitive verb and them is the object. But if we instead had a sentence like, I see something, then over time, you could have the word something get glommed into the verb, and then eventually, see something becomes interpreted as an intransitive verb. Like, it doesn't matter what's being seen, it's just the fact that seeing is happening is the important thing. And in fact, if this language has an animacy split, which it does, then we could even get away with having two different indefinite pronouns, one animate, so someone, and the other inanimate, like something. So we could have two different D-transitives, which is kind of like what nahuatl does. Nahuatl has two indefinite object prefixes, but instead of being animate and inanimate, it's specifically human and non-human. I kind of like that, and it makes sense, if this language is going to pay attention to animacy, that there would be two separate roots for that. But if that's the etymology of the D-transitive, can that also be the etymology of the passive? Well, something that immediately comes to mind, if we have an intransitive verb like I sleep, and then we use the indefinite pronoun as the subject, then once again, if that gets incorporated into the verb stem, those same affixes can be used to obfuscate the subject of an intransitive verb and the direct object of a transitive verb, which means that this affix behaves in an ergative kind of way. So when applied to a transitive verb, it acts as a D-transitive / antipassive. When applied to an intransitive verb, it becomes what would that be called? I guess that would be an impersonal? Yeah, we'll call that an impersonal. So if the D-transitive and the impersonal are the same, what about the passive? Let's take a passive like I am seen by them. Now, theoretically, you could use the indefinite pronoun for either the subject or the object in this case. Like you could have someone is seen by them, or you could have I am seen by someone. Both of those would be grammatically possible. But for the incorporated version, I think in general it's much more likely that an object will get incorporated into the verb than a subject. So I think by this stage, the affix would apply specifically to the object. So that there is a passive. That is a true passive. That's a passive in which the subject is completely obfuscated, as in the subject isn't important to understand the meaning. So the only difference between these two is that in the second one, the agent is completely obfuscated, whereas in this one, the agent is stated as an oblique. So going back to this idea over here, this one would be considered just a mediopassive, whereas this is a true passive. So the general idea of the mediopassive, or with just a general middle voice, is that the subject is kind of agent-like and kind of patient-like. So what I'm thinking is, if we removed the by them bit and just say I am seen, would that still be a viable sentence? Some languages, when they passivize a sentence, simply do not allow the agent to be stated in any way, even as an oblique. So if the reflexive evolved from some word that meant something like self, or body, or maybe head is a very common one, I can see that becoming associated with the mediopassive, because the middle voice is sort of intrinsically associated with reflexivity anyway, so I can see a noun like body or head becoming incorporated to form a true reflexive. I'm fine with that. What I'm not totally sure about is the reciprocal. Because, I mean, it's very common for reflexive and reciprocals to be marked with the same morphology, but would the reciprocal be counted with the active stem? So, like, with the reflexive, it would be something like, I am body washed, where in this case, that passive that I'm using in the English example would mean like a middle type thing. So this would mean like, I am self-washing, I am washing myself. Whereas in a reciprocal, it would be, they are body fighting, as in they are fighting each other. Because if this latter one was put into the mediopassive, that would be interpreted as a reflexive, like they are fighting themselves, which is subtly different from they are fighting each other. This kind of feels like a situation where it would make sense for the reflexive and the reciprocal to come from different roots, but I'd prefer them not to if I can get away with it. Another option would be to just have the reciprocal be the same as the reflexive, except with some other clarifying adverb or something, like each other in English. But of course, we also have to consider the other can of worms, which is, what about ergativity? Because if this language was ergative, or at least if it was fully ergative, then the thing with intransitive verbs would stay the same, but transitive verbs, functionally, transitive verbs would all be passive, because it would be the agent that would be placed in an oblique case, and then it would be the patient that is the subject. So if we were assuming ergativity, then a transitive sentence like I see them would be I in the ergative, then see, and then them in the absolutive, which is functionally the same as saying they are seen by me. Because the ergative just serves as extra marking to let the listener know who the agent is. And if that's the case, then which of those arguments would be more likely to be represented by the incorporated version of the indefinite pronoun? So I think just in general it's more likely that the oblique gets incorporated, which in this case is the subject, sort of. So it would be they are seen by someone, which would be the same as saying someone sees them, and then someone sees would become its own impersonalized verb stem. So functionally, that would do the same thing as the impersonal on an intransitive. It would obfuscate the subject. And honestly, I don't think I like that as much. I prefer the switch between impersonal and D-transitive. I think that's cool. So yeah, I'm going to get rid of that. So let me just go ahead and try and map out what we've got so far. So at the top level, we have a distinction between active and we'll just call it mediopassive for now. And the active will just be the bare form of the verb, and the mediopassive will be marked by some affix. For now, we'll say it comes from some verb that means like take or get or receive, something along those lines. That's a pretty common pathway. And then in the active stem, we've got a distinction between, we'll call it indicative and reciprocal, maybe, if I decide to go with that. And in the mediopassive, it's between indicative and reflexive. You know what? I just realized we've got our auxiliary verbs up here, and it's the auxiliaries that are marked for the subject. So if we have an impersonal affix that obfuscates the subject, that'll actually show up on the auxiliary. But it would still apply to the active stem as a D-transitive. Can you have a reciprocal D-transitive? I don't think so. No, because in the reciprocal, the agent is also the patient. So the patient is stated, so the D-transitive doesn't come into effect. Okay, cool, that's fine. And then over here, in the mediopassive, the same suffix becomes true passive. Alright. And so those 6 would contrast with our various applicatives. And by the way, yeah, I'm just going to get rid of the adjuvative because I don't get it. I think I might chuck circumstantial for now until I can think of something better. But I'm happy with those 4. And then that pattern would have different forms for the infinitive, the perfective, and the imperfective converb forms. Again, those names are almost certainly going to change. And then we have our special imperative, which never got associated with the auxiliary verb like the other verb forms did. I can't actually remember what I decided last time about the imperative, but I think I was going to go with separate perfective and imperfective imperatives inherited from the system way back in the day. Yeah, and then down here we just had a couple of other derivational sort of affixes, and they can contrast with any and all of these forms, so I'm just going to put them down there for now. And unless I'm missing something, I think that's pretty much going to be what our paradigm for lexical verbs looks like. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now, the auxiliary verbs. So I'm keeping the impersonal form. Oh yeah, and there was this thing which I'd left in for the possibility of a separate negative auxiliary. And I'm not going to get rid of that just yet, but I am going to just put it over there somewhere. And then there was my idea for pluractionality in the auxiliary verb. as a way of evolving a distinct second-person formal and informal thing, which I did quite like. So I'm going to put that there for now. So those will be our subject markers, and they will be prefixes. They'll be the first thing in the verb template. And then we've got the stem, which will either be short or long, in accordance with the pattern from the proto-language. And then because these evidentials evolved from a separate phrase that becomes cliticized to the end of the verb, all of these are compatible with all of these, so I'm going to keep them as separate tables for now. Because at this stage, the point isn't to actually decide what the full paradigm is going to look like, it's just a rough conceptualization of where the different information is going to be marked. So all this is subject to change. So the only real question is this pluractional thing. Usually that evolves from some sort of distributive sense. Like if you say something to the effect of, I see a dog here and there, or I oftentimes see a dog, that kind of implies that there are multiple dogs. So over time, that gets reanalyzed as I see many dogs, with a plural object. Now that can come from reduplication, but we've already got a reduplication pattern in the stem. That's how we're tentatively doing the split between the perfective and imperfective. Or pluractionality could be marked on the lexical verb. So an easy way to do it would be to just have it evolve from some adverb that means something like often or many times. But in that case, would that apply more to the lexical verb or to the auxiliary verb? So if you had a sentence like, I see dogs. So with our auxiliary converb combination, that would be something like, I am while seeing dogs. So with pluractionality, if the frequentative applied to the auxiliary, I often am while seeing dogs. Alternatively, with the lexical verb, it would be I am while often seeing dogs. And once again, I just feel like it's more natural for it to apply to the semantic content of the lexical verb. So we'll take the pluractional down here then. Which I kind of like that, because it's like, in some sense, the information about the subject is also being spread across the sentence, across these two verbs. That's kind of cool. And with that, I think that's basically all of the information that's going to be covered by our verb system. So that's going to be the general format and layout of how our verbs work. But of course, all of this is going to be evolved naturally, so like I say, this is quite likely to change. And very good timing as well, because I am nearing the end of the time I had allotted myself. So I'm going to call it there. So thank you very much for watching, and tune back next time, where hopefully we will get onto the case system. That'll be fun. Another big thank you to all the new patrons, and I will see you all in the next video.